sponsored by every week. I'm Alan Seslowsky of RotoWire.com, along with fantasy expert Mark Stopa. And today on this Dynasty podcast, we're going to talk about the art of rebuilding an orphan team. You hear a lot about startup drafts. We love our Dynasty startup drafts, but I'm seeing more and more interest, Mark Stopa, in people wanting to take over pre-existing teams. And you're actually one of those guys. You've been asking me a lot of questions in the offseason about, getting seriously deeper into Dynasty. And I guess my first question for you is, why is an orphan team, a team that's been abandoned by another fantasy owner in an established league, why is that an appealing thing to dip your toes into?
Well, I think for me, as someone who's played fantasy football since 1995, but never done a dynasty, the first draw was just getting into it in the first place, just starting dynasty in the first place. And for me, that started by kind of eliminating two misconceptions that I kind of had about it. The first was that it would be this big time consuming thing, playing year round, and it's a big time suck in season 2. And it's really not like that. I think that's because the rosters are just so deep. At least all the formats I've seen, the benches are so deep, the rosters are so deep, that really lends itself to it not being as time consuming during the season. So when I saw that, I'm like, okay, I want to start getting into this. And we've been chatting about it the last few months. And then I realized the second misconception I kind of got over is, you don't have to be a college football guru in order to play. And so I had this perception, and I suspect a lot of people do. If you don't watch college football, if you're not up on who are going to be the top picks, if you haven't studied them, then it's going to be hard to succeed. And obviously that's going to help some, but I think it's pretty clear you don't need to do that. There's a million gurus out there who are doing rookie rankings. So, once I got over those two, it's like, this is fun. And I'd love to be able to take over somebody else's team and get it going. And you kind of get that fill of football during the off season that you miss, since the season's obviously over now. So yeah, I'm pumped. Let's go.
I must be too in the weeds. I'm in 38 dynasty leagues. I'm trying to pare it back a little bit this year. And those two, when you told me about those two misconceptions, it makes total sense to me, but it was eye-opening because since I'm in so many leagues, I've been playing Dynasty for about 9 years now, is that, yeah, it's actually less time because the rosters are 30, 35 deep, sometimes 40 when you include the 10 to, 5 to 10 person taxi squad, which we'll get into that, is that there's almost no maintenance. It's just lineup setting. And, very few guys pop up on waivers when you have 300 plus 350 guys rostered in a league. I mean, you might see, Rashid Shaheed pop up, or Brock Purdy, if, and even in superflex, those guys do pop up, but it's not every week. It's not a grind. So you make a really good point. And then you also, the eye opener was when you said you don't have to watch college football. In fact, my answer to you is that sometimes when you do watch college football, it's a negative for Dynasty. And what do I mean by that is you have all these preconceived notions about who's supposed to be good, who's supposed to be bad. Oh, I've seen them play and the Saturday transfer to Sunday. And the last thing that you said is that let the market do the work for you. There's so many good Dynasty rookie evaluators out there that let's just be a collaborator of that information, process it in the way that that we see fit. So yeah, no, that was a really, I learned something from talking to you over these last few months. So, all right, you've got into a few orphan leagues this year, basically adopted an orphan. There's a team, sometimes Dynasty owners, they just, they have other things going on in their life. They have to abandon. And what I always think makes for a good league, a good commissioner, is making sure people pay 1 year in advance, or certainly paying for the year they trade away the pick. So if you want to trade away your 2025 first, you need to pay for 2024 and 2025.
Totally agree.
And a lot of the leagues, they do that. If someone is not making you pay a year in advance, you don't want to be in that league. It could fall. But I also believe that sometimes people panic when people leave leagues. I think it's good to have fresh blood in the league.
I've noticed when I joined Orphans, instantly people are interacting with you. They're presenting trade offers. That kind of makes it fun, and it makes it easy to immediately start molding the team in the way that you want to be able to do it.
Okay, so let's talk about the 7 tips, I put up there 7 tips because I'm sure we'll have more than that. But there's definitely some things that you could do that are universally applicable to rebuilding these teams. So, you came in, kind of, let's say, blissfully ignorant to what to expect. So what was the first thing that you did when you took a look at these teams? How did you evaluate it in the direction you were going to go?
The first thing I did as I looked at each orphan that I took over was I was honest with myself about how good the team is. And I say that with an eye towards, does this team have a realistic chance to compete and win this season in 2023? And I evaluated that first by looking at my own team and then by comparing it to some of the other teams in the league. How does it stack up? And then from there it would be, I'd start to get a gauge for, okay, do I want to go into win now mode, or do I want to try to take a longer term approach to this? And I don't think it'd be surprising to say for people to realize when you're taking over an orphan, often those aren't the best teams, but they're often better than you might think. So that to me is the first step, is just being honest with yourself about your ability to compete and do well and win in 2023.
And I think as someone that takes over an orphan, you have more clarity on that. Sometimes I've drafted a team, we all look at ourselves in the mirror, Mark Stopa, and we all think we're a little bit handsomer than we are, right? So when I build a team, I'm looking at it and, in reality, it might be like the 7th best team. I'm like, I can make the playoffs. I can win it all. So, but you have the benefit of you don't have any attachment to this team other than you just took it over. So you're looking at them as like a car that you could sell off for the parts. So, okay, you take a look at the team, you're honest with yourself, and let's say that you think you're like you said, somewhere in a middling type of team. What type of trades do you think are you looking to make here? Are you looking to acquire picks? Are you looking to acquire veterans? Let's just, for sake of argument, just say you have all of your 23 and 24 and 25 picks intact, nothing extra. A team that you think is, I don't want to say stuck in the middle, because what you think is the middle today is a top 3 team tomorrow, right? If you had Jamal Williams on your team last year, you would have thought that's just like a bench piece. And now he was an every week starter for fantasy football. So what's going to be your basic strategy? Tip number 2 here, as you evaluate the roster.
I personally, I've taken a quick look and by certainly not in depth or anything like that at who's coming out in the 2024 draft. And there are some names there that I really like, that even as just a casual college football watcher, the people listening could probably watch more college football than I do. But I see Caleb Williams, Drake May, 2 guys who set up to be top 5 picks in that draft and have the potential to be franchise QBs. I see Marvin Harrison and I see Brock Bowers. We all know Marvin Harrison and Brock Bowers. He's become kind of a household name because he's played for Georgia. So I see guys who I'm like, wow, I'd really love to be able to have them next year. So and I'm sure there'll be others too who emerge over the course of this year. So I've been trying to take some of my assets that I don't really like or don't really view as long-term holds, or guys who I can't ever envision myself wanting to start in the future, and allocate those towards 2024 draft picks. Like we chatted about a trade that I did the other day involving Zay Jones, who I think is a great example of somebody who he was on an orphan team that I took over. I think there's a really good chance he just had his career year last year. He's not somebody who I think I'm really going to be excited about starting in this coming season. And so, I moved him in a package deal to acquire some future assets. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm looking to do, because I want to be able to get some of those studs for the next draft class, especially on those teams that aren't going to win this year.
Yeah, you're saying a lot of the things that a lot of the dynasty managers out there that take over dynasty teams, like these are all mistakes that I made. Like I was trying to acquire guys off of career years when I first started playing dynasty. So, you having played a lot of high stakes redraft, you've put together a lot of DFS puzzles. You're thinking about this in the right way. And again, you're going to be a lot more advanced than even some of the players that have been playing for years, just based on how you're thinking about that. Right. You want to, you want to, I know this sounds like, but you don't need to be a fantasy analyst for this advice. Acquire as many elite players and shots at the dartboard as you can, especially when you're shedding, Zay Jones types. Now, how about someone like a Travis Etienne? I know that you would ask me about a trade with him. Do you not view him? I mean, because running backs in Dynasty, yes, they could have the quote shorter shelf life than the wide receivers, but they're so expensive to buy these young running backs, even though they do expire in shorter windows. So, what do you think if you have a middling roster and you have players like Najee Harris, Travis Etienne? Are you going to hold on to those type of players, or are you looking to basically cash them in early on in the dynasty or in the dynasty startup, dynasty orphan season?
Well, let me give that full trade as a great example, I think, to answer your question. I traded Travis Etienne, Zay Jones, and Jalen Warren for Drake London, a 2.9 and a 3.5. And Etienne was obviously the biggest piece that I gave up, and then Drake London, the biggest piece I got back. Here's why I like that. In a vacuum, all else equal, I prefer London over Etienne because he's already younger. He hasn't hit his career peak. He's going to play longer. He plays at a position where there's less injury risk. So obviously I love Etienne too, but and they're close, but I like when I see, having played fantasy for years, when I see rosters that allow you to stash a whole ton of players, the roster build that I love is stud receivers, plug and play, guys you don't have to think about. You start every week and you have a ton of running back handcuffs, running backs with upside who you can stash so that when the injuries happen, they can become a starter in the short term. I love that kind of roster build. And that's what your typical dynasty setup seems to me to lend itself to. So that's all. That'll all goes into my thought process on that trade. Like Zay Jones, we talked about, Jalen Warren, just a guy, got 2 solid draft picks, and Drake London, who's going to be, an every week starter for years. And if Lamar Jackson goes there, then all the better. So, that's how I like to build, especially with those deep lineups. That's not to say that's the right way, but I've had a lot of success in the past doing that.
Yeah, and right now, Travis Etienne's ADP will be a little bit higher than Drake London's, but that's why you make that trade, because dynasty players, we try to think that we think long-term, but the idea is really to say, in 18 months from now, and the reason I say 18 months a lot of times on this podcast is the next offseason, not just the next season in front of us, not just the offseason, but we start the 24 season. Which player are you going to want? And it looks like you said that Drake London's basically being traded at his floor right now. If they get a quarterback that we like, I mean, they had one of the worst quarterback situations in the league. It's kind of been underrated. They get Lamar Jackson. If they get Jimmy Garoppolo, I'm saying Andy Dalton, like anybody that could at least buoy the offense, Drake London's going to be one of those 14 target players every week. And with Calvin Ridley coming back in Jacksonville, that can't be good for the pass catching of Travis Etienne, right? I mean, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I totally agree. Atlanta had as bad of a passing environment as you could possibly have in the NFL last year. And so it can only go up from here. It's just a matter of how much it goes up and how quickly, that they're going to get a quarterback at some point. Let's see how that unfolds. The week could strike gold with that. So to me, you want to try to acquire guys who have talent, who haven't had it strike quite in a way yet. Like everybody knows, Trevor Lawrence, he's an MVP, a top 7 or 8 in the MVP now. So everybody's on the Jaguars now. I want to try to get on the guys before everybody gets on them. Like, Olave is another example. Guys like that who, if they get a quarterback, they're going to explode.
And you're going to also find that when you're in these leagues that there's going to be a very pick hungry sector of the league where there's going to be fantasy players that will overpay for picks, especially as we get closer to the draft and those names start to surface out. Like, once the NFL Combine happens, and obviously after the draft happens, rookie fever is a real thing. And if you don't give in to that rookie fever, meaning like if you just don't get locked on a guy, you could really take advantage in the veteran market. And I think that's, how you're going to be able to play it as well. So there is a way, you do want to acquire picks, like you said, for those Zay Jones types, acquire as many seconds, as many thirds as you can sometimes, because often you could package those picks and move up to first rounders. Now, yeah, no one's going to trade you 105 in a rookie draft for 2 seconds or 3 seconds. It's just not going to happen. But if you're sitting there in your rookie draft and you're on the clock at 110 and you just kind of see the next 7 or 8 picks as a tier, and you have pick 204, you might be able to package that with something else. So I think the name of the game in Orphan Rebuild is to acquire as many, middle of the road, non-premium picks right now, knowing that you're not going to stick and pick on all of those.
Yeah, and I don't want to limit it either to the Zay Jones type. I'm doing an Orphan right now where I'm actively trying to trade Saquon Barkley for multiple ones in the future. If I can get firsts in 2024, then that gives you a chance to get the Caleb Williams or Drake May. And I find myself trying to target first round picks on team for 2024 on teams that don't look good, who maybe they're going to miss the playoffs. And then most dynasty leagues are set up where it's kind of a little bit random on who gets 1.1. So give me as many of those first in 2024 as possible. And that's what I'm looking to try to do right now on the teams that I don't think can win this year.
And the 101 is often overrated, Mark Stopa. Like right now, just think about 2023. There is a consensus building that Texas rookie running back Bijan Robinson should be the 101 in superflex leagues. And people are just like, oh yeah, it's that's the consensus. Of course, Bijan's number 101. And this is before he's even landed. Now, this is assuming he's going to be an all-time prospect, and he very well could be, but what if he's Cam Akers, right? As far as his production profile, what if the Titans take him and he's got to, do what Derrick Henry did, sit behind, DeMarco Murray for a couple of years before he really gets his shot. I'm just saying there's a lot of things that people are assuming that he's going to go in, be a workhorse and start day one. He's going to be Zeke Elliott, but unless he gets top 5 draft capital, if he's picked at pick 19 or 30, that's not necessarily going to be the case. I mean, we've seen running back 1 go off the board, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Now, I'm not comparing Edwards-Helaire and Bijan Robinson, but we've seen it not work out before. 18 months from now, I'm saying it again, is who's likely to have more shelf life value? Running back 1 rookie or quarterback 1 rookie, right? I mean, if you're talking about Bryce Young, the rookie quarterback out of Alabama, why isn't he going to be the 101? Why is everyone assuming that Bijan Robinson should be the 101? And I'm going to tie this back to our rebuild strategy for orphans. So where are you are you keeping an open mind about how the top pick in rookie drafts in 2023 should go?
Absolutely, especially in Superflex Dynasty, because as we've discussed off air, it is really difficult to acquire quarterbacks in Superflex Dynasty. So, I'd be very open-minded towards having 1.1 as whatever quarterback I preferred. There's no right answers there. You're not doing anything wrong if you do that. Sometimes there becomes a group think in fantasy, and fantasy industry is wrong a lot. So, it's your team. If you'd rather have the quarterback, especially in the super flex, even if it's Stroud, it doesn't have to be Young either. I mean, heck, it could be Levis,
Right.
There is so much uncertainty with what college quarterbacks are going to pan out. Like Josh Allen, I'm wearing the jersey. I got a Bill Shrine in here. He was the 3rd quarterback drafted in his season. You just don't know.
That's your home? I thought you were in the Bills Hall of Fame doing this live podcast right here. No. Anyone watching this on or listening on the audio, certainly check out Mark Stopa's shrine on the video, which I've linked in the description below. But yeah, I was just, I'm not necessarily saying it's Young. I'm just saying quarterback 1. Why? For me, quarterback 1 is, if they're going to push these guys down the rookie board, and you are doing an orphan rebuild and you have one of those picks, I mean, you just want to treat it like a regular NFL team, trade down to get multiple picks. If someone's going to give you, for example, pick 2 and pick 5 for 101, I mean, you need to add some other pieces because 101 right now is being treated like peak Bitcoin, but there is something to that. I mean, everyone thought Javonte Williams. Now, again, injury, whatever, no fault of his own, but it's shaping up like someone like that who was going top 3 in rookie drafts. he may have another 2023 might be a J.K. Dobbins-esque year for him coming back for that injury. So, quarterbacks, especially quarterback one in any particular draft, is going to have so much insulation. You look, even Zach Wilson, who was horrible, right? I mean, you couldn't be worse than Zach Wilson was, or at least the perception is. And he got 2 full seasons of mostly starting, I mean, and that's if everything went completely wrong. Imagine if a running back was bad, as that bad. They would have 2 games of that. So you would do with quarterbacks, get a little bit of extra insulation. And this conversation started as far as those randomized picks that you want in 24. Look, Jamar Chase in superflex leagues that year was going pick 5, pick 6. And there was people taking Zach Wilson ahead of him. I think I did that in one draft. I was like, oh, you always take the quarterback. So those randomized firsts are definitely a key to rebuilding. My next question for you, Mark, is and this isn't any dynasty league, but it's particular in an orphan where you're the new guy. What are some trade tips as far as everything from temperament, from types of offers? What do you think is the key to getting some of these trades done when you're basically in a league with some strangers? I mean, if you're in a league with your boys, that's one thing, but what are some actionable tips that you can give people when they pick up orphans on how to get deals done?
I'd say first is patience. Understand that when you're the new guy, you may, especially if it's an active league, you may get flooded with offers that are, they're throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks. And, you may get some bad offers in there, give some counters and, give a counter. If I get an offer like that, I'll give a counter that is similarly tilted in my side. And that shows the guy, okay, I'm not just going to put one over on this new owner right away. And I had one trade that I finished the other day that we must have had 20 counters. And the process of that, you can kind of see how each other's thinking. So, stay patient. Don't be afraid to counter and just keep at it and keep trying. And, I find it a lot of fun to start the trading process going as quickly as possible once you take over an orphans and kind of shape the team the way that you want to, get some of your guys in there, get rid of some of the guys who you don't like or that sort of thing.
The other thing you could do is make sure that, when you're sending an offer to someone else or a counter offer, is that you're doing something that helps their team. That, if they have, 7 wide receivers and only 3 wide receiver starting spots, you don't want to send an offer for their running back and then you give them another wide receiver that they can't start, right? So I would say that understanding how it's going to bring value to the other team is also a key. It might be the offer you send over might be fair, but it might be useless to the other team.
And sometimes that's a function of identifying whether that team is competing to win this year or whether they're rebuilding, and whether you're offering them, for a team competing for this year, they're going to love your Saquon Barkley in exchange for, future firsts or that sort of thing. So yeah, absolutely agree with you there.
Yeah. So, and then the other trading tip that I wanted to ask you about, or as far as team builds, is the tight end position. Do you think now in redraft, we often say is okay, if you're not going to pay up for Travis Kelce, right, just forget it. And a lot of times I don't even like how my team looks on paper when I take Kelce in, mid round 1 or mid round 2, depending on what year it is. And we could just cycle through, tight end 8 through 16 and hope that we land a dart. In dynasty leagues, it's not as simple because the waiver wire is barren. I mean, there's really, only backup tight ends are rostered. So what's going to be in a lot of these dynasty startups, that most of them are super flex now. A lot of them aren't even 1 QB, and a lot of them are tight end premium, where you're either having to start 2 tight ends, you're having to get 1.5 or 2 points for tight ends. So when most people are still kind of ignoring the tight end position, is there an edge to be had in your orphan? Are you going to be targeting some premium tight ends as you rebuild these abandoned teams?
Well, I already mentioned Brock Bowers. I've been taking a look at the Notre Dame tight end Myers.
Michael Mayer.
Yeah. So, I'm trying to, obviously, I'm not a college football guy, but I've been trying to gauge, read what other people are saying about them and decide, how high should he be going? Because man, what a cheat code that would be if you can hit on a next great tight end and you've got him in Dynasty for 10 years. So I've already been assessing, how high should Meyer be going this year. Seems like he's early to mid second round rookie drafts right now. That's a personal preference thing. So much of it is hit or miss. But yeah, I mean, what do you think about guys like that?
Well, tight ends traditionally take 3 to 4 years to develop. It's not. I mean, look at TJ Hawkinson, for example. He's been mostly a fantasy disappointment relative to where he went. He was going like pick 6 or 7 in rookie drafts. He was a top 10, top 12 real NFL draft pick, right? And he's only come on now. And I mean, you can't say that the Lions weren't a good environment. He's had games, but now he's solidly in there. So you have to be patient. So the key is, if you want to be competitive, it's not uncommon for a dynasty tight end to last till age 34, 35, and they may not even hit till they're 27. Gerald Everett's a good example. He was kind of dead for dynasty, and then last year came alive, and those type of guys will be on 1-year contracts. So I'm looking in the startup draft to acquire an elite tight end, and they've never been cheaper than they are right now. I mean, Travis Kelce will undoubtedly be a top 5 pick in redraft, top 8 pick in redraft, and he's probably like tight end 3 or 4 in a lot of these startups. You can get him in the 3rd round. I mean, I think that's really the edge with any player, is looking at the redraft. Let the redraft market do the work for you. Look at the redraft ranking, look at the dynasty ADP, and the larger the gap, the better the value. So my dynasty strategy has always been to go after older players, and while backfilling, because they're undervalued. So I guess really, who are some of the tight ends that you think could be a value for people? And I mean, you just can't. As you're doing these orphans, basically, you do need to be competitive, right? You're not just doing a total shutdown. You can be competitive and rebuild at the same time. So who are some of the veteran tight ends that you might target that you think can be a little bit undervalued this year?
Gosh,
Darren Waller.
I always defer when I'm in doubt to the high scoring offenses, good quarterbacks. We haven't seen my boy in Buffalo take off yet.
Knox.
Yeah, Dustin Knox. Yeah. That's what I always tend to do when all else is in doubt, especially when you're dealing with older, veteran players. I don't think we've seen Knox's best season yet. I'd like to see what the Chargers do at tight end. I think we've seen, you mentioned Gerald Everett. I think we've seen his best season. So I don't know. Did you have some guys in mind you wanted to talk about?
I mean, yeah, just like, the good profiles that people basically have abandoned. Like Darren Waller, for me, would be someone that I'm looking to acquire. He's never been cheaper to acquire. I mean, if you have, anywhere in the first round, if you have pick 112, somebody will easily flip that for Darren Waller, in my judgment, right? So, but he might even be cheaper. He's had 2 bad seasons. He's age 29, but he's had elite production. They're going to get a new quarterback now, right? And go ahead, Mark.
Let me tell you where my mind goes on this. You said a few minutes ago that it takes a while for tight ends to develop, young tight ends, right? And I agree that's how it's been, but are we going to, and Kyle Pitts certainly is a great recent example of that, but are we going to always assume that that's, going to be the case going forward? Like I can remember it wasn't long ago that rookie receivers was a complete no-no in fantasy football. Right. As a bit of an older guy, been playing since 95, it used to be the 3rd year receivers. That was the year for the breakout. And then it became the 2nd year. And then suddenly recently it's rookies. So I'd say I'd push back on the groupthink that the young tight ends can emerge, and that I'm higher on some of these younger guys, like the Meyer, especially in a dynasty format where they're so hard to get. So, because maybe that overconfidence on young tight ends taking a long time will prove to be wrong, and that'll change over time, just the way that it's changed for rookie and 2nd year receivers. So that's where my mind goes as we have this conversation.
That's a really good point, because we've also seen the tight end position. You've persuaded me here, because the tight end position also has become a hybrid wide receiver, right? As the Evan Ingram prototype, right? Like those guys there's very few guys that are just pure blocking guys. I mean, get maybe like a Daniel Bellinger as an example of like an old school tight end who's a red zone threat, but we've seen more and more of it. And he was also a later round pick. But if you're getting picked at the tight end position, if you're tight end one, Trey McBride last year, you're seeing that these guys are basically wide receivers. Here, they're still going to score less than the wide receivers. And I like that you talked about the evolution of the game. And the reason that wide receivers, for example, where they went to be year 3 breakout, then year 2 breakout. Now we expect it in year 1 is because of the pro style offense and the college offense. There's not much difference like there once was, in the 1990s or early 2000s.
Yeah. Let's capitalize on that.
Yeah. So, I like that. Like even Pat Freiermuth, right? He was productive in year 1. I mean, he was usable in year 1 once he got his opportunity. So, yeah, I mean, so maybe there you go. There's another tip for your rebuild. If there's going to be teams that want to give you rookie picks, for those veteran tight ends that may have seen their best days already, maybe that's a strategy as well. All right, let's give people a couple other things that they could do for their orphan rebuilds. But first, we're going to take a quick break here. The YouTube audience, stick with us. Audio listeners, will be back in 2 minutes. All right, and we're back. I'm Alan Seslowsky from RotoWire. I'm here with Mark Stopa, and we are talking about 7 tips to rebuild an orphan dynasty fantasy football team. So one of the most common questions I get, Mark, is how do I get an orphan team, right? How do I get into these leagues? And there's a couple different ways. You can obviously, if you like playing on Sleeper, there's different chat groups to get into. You can DM Mark at Mark Stopa at Alan Seslowsky. Either of us will help you get there. We know people who know people, and the Dynasty community is definitely growing. Our friends over at Dynasty Depot, go to dynastydepot.com. They put up a bunch of not orphan teams, but teams for sale. They get very sensitive when I call them orphan teams, not because of like woke language or anything, but they insist that those teams are not abandoned, that those teams are basically drafted to sell to someone. So Dynasty Depot, if you like playing on FFPC. But right now we're talking about like best strategies, best practices for taking over those teams and rebuilding them. I want to switch the conversation to veteran players and some of the veteran players that you might be interested in, that the Dynasty market, who's youth crazy, Mark Stopa, who you might be looking to acquire. So who are some of the players that might be age 26 to age 29 of their receivers that you might be, even if you're rebuilding the team, looking to acquire in some of the trades?
Well, I wrote down a couple names of guys I'm targeting who aren't rookies, and I want to make sure we talk about Trey Lance in this podcast.
Okay, so let's start there. Trey Lance.
He's an example to me of, sometimes you got to take calculated risks to win, especially if you're taking over an orphan. And when I saw the Brock Purdy injury update last week, I don't think it made nearly enough headlines. And the headline was his surgery was delayed. He still hasn't had his UCL surgery because of excess swelling still there. But even worse than that, what I read was that the surgery is essentially going to be exploratory, and they're not sure how bad the damage is going to be until they get in there. And he could miss the whole season depending on what's in there. That was my takeaway from that. So when I saw that, I'm like, whoa, people aren't talking about this. We don't know what's going to happen, but that could happen as soon as a week or two. So I've been putting out Trey Lance offers, and I want to have him because he's in an awesome setup and really hasn't had much of a chance yet. So he's probably not quite a veteran, but that's somebody who I'm targeting for sure as a what I'd call a calculated risk.
Yeah, no, that's a really good one. I think that's right now he in ADP, Mark Stopa, he's quarterback 12. If he was named the unquestioned starter for week 1 right now today, he would be quarterback 7. That's going from 12 to 7 is a huge jump in the rankings. It's more impressive than going from position like wide receiver 60 to 35, right? I mean, that is a major jump. The higher up you get in the rankings, the less spots you need to jump for that to be significant. So there you go. Buy into the doubt of Trey Lance. And really, everyone's assuming Trey Lance sucks, right? Everyone's thinking of talking themselves out of Trey Lance. I know there's Trey Lance truthers out there, but hey, look, the draft capital was still invested in him, right? We love the team context, And like you said, there's never been these guys normally aren't even acquirable. Someone like, a lot of people don't like Kyler Murray, but he's never been easier to acquire in a superflex league than now, right? So those are some of the profiles you want to chase rather than just be like, I want to see first if he comes back, if he's aimed to start. Too late then. You need to strike right now.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Because by the time Brock Purdy's surgery happens, if it comes out, it reminds me a little of Von Miller, where I remember he went into the surgery and then came out of it with a torn ACL. That's what this reminded me of. By the time Purdy's surgery is done, if that news breaks that, it was worse than they thought, then your opportunity's gone. And that's probably only a week away.
Yeah. And Trey Lance does have quarterback 1 overall for a season in his range of outcomes. Like that is there. He has that RG3 style of upside, especially given the team context. So let's talk into Superflex 2QB, because all of the dynasty leagues I do now are Superflex, and we always cover 1 quarterback leagues as well. But so what are some of the type of trades just, that you could put out there from? What do you think do you have to give another quarterback to the guy? It's very rare does a quarterback change hands without another quarterback coming back. No one has extra quarterbacks.
How about late first or early second of rookie draft? I think there are some Lance owners out there who would do that.
For that single pick?
Just for something like that. I think there are Lance owners that would do that. I've had conversations with Lance owners, and that's what I'd be looking to do.
Wow, that seems cheap to me. I guess if you get on the clock, right, and someone like Anthony Richardson, the quarterback out of Florida, let's say he does get first round draft capital, but he's behind an aging starter. Let's say that, I'm just going to make this up. Let's say that for sake of argument, Andy Dalton is the starter on a certain team. Anthony Richardson's the rookie behind him. He goes late first round, maybe early second round. Pick 110 is his ADP. Someone doesn't like Lance. That's the type of...
Great comparison, because see, I think most people right now would rather have Richardson, because he doesn't have the 2 years of fleas that Lance has, whereas I would far prefer to have Lance than Richardson. So that's where I think, you could maybe get Lance for the late first round in a rookie draft, because somebody's thinking, I could get somebody like Richardson. So a great comparison there.
Yeah, and we'll give you a couple more other suggestions on that. But first, I just want to do a quick acknowledgement of our sponsor for this podcast. It's Underdog Fantasy. The 2022 season might be over, Mark Stopa, but fantasy football season never stops, as you know, on Underdog Fantasy, which is the easiest place to play fantasy football right now. Underdog's big board draft tournament is open with $1 million in prizes, $200K to first. I think which one of the rookies will burst onto the scene in 2023. Now's your chance to draft them at value. All you have to do is join the big board, as I've done many drafts already there. And that's it. In Bestball, there's no waivers, no trades. You get the best scores in their starting lineup each week of the season. Whoever has the highest score at the end of the season wins the cash, Mark Stopa. Just head to UnderdogFantasy.com, the App Store or Google Play Store. Sign up with promo code RWNFL. I'm going to say that code again, RWNFL. And not only will you get a first deposit doubled up to $100, but right now, Mark Stopa, if they use that code, we're going to give them free 6 months on RotoWire. Free 6 months. So nice. You put in $100, you get an extra 100. You put in 50, you get an extra 50. You can put in 10, get an extra 10. There's no minimum requirement, but you're also going to get that free 6-month membership on RotoWire.com. Links are in the video description below. Links are in the audio description as well. We'll get into some best ball later in the season, but you're a big best ball guy. Have you started doing any of the big board stuff yet?
I have not. I usually treat best ball as my way to kind of prepare for my important drafts and auctions for in seasonal. And I usually tend to do that starting over the summer. That's like great prep when you're on the clock in like a slow draft and you have to decide between 2 or 3 different guys. That's great prep for me.
Yeah, I've done a couple already, and we're going to be live streaming them. They've been, they're a great sponsor of this pod. So go over and check out Underdog Fantasy. All right. We are also going to be talking about, as we were talking about, is our rebuilding of an orphan team. Mark Stopa identified Trey Lance as a great trade target whose value is depressed. And yeah, you have to take some swings. There's upside swings there. How about give me a wide receiver that you think might be a little bit undervalued, that even if you take over an orphan team, that could be a player that you should be targeting?
I have been actively trying to get Khalil Shakir on my teams. And maybe this is some Buffalo in me, but here's a stat for you. The Bills have 2 wide receivers under contract for 2024, which is only 1 year from now. Stephon Diggs, who will be 31, and Shakir. That's it. Shakir, the Bills have, their coaches have had a blind spot towards using rookies. They've underutilized rookies significantly. Shakir, to my eye, was significantly better than Isaiah McKenzie or certainly Cole Beasley or some of those kind of guys they were trotting out last year. I want him. I think he was underutilized last year. I think he's going to take off this year. I think the same thing about James Cook, who was an underutilized rookie. Devin Singletary's a free agent. I think Cook has the chance to explode. So those are 2 guys who I like their talent. They pass the eye test. I expect Buffalo to draft some linemen and to, build up that offense around Allen. And those are 2 guys, Shakir, especially at receiver, to answer your question, who I'm looking to target even as rebuilding teams, especially since they're both young and have certainly not played their best ball yet.
Yeah, Shakir, who was drafted in the 5th round of the real NFL draft, in some of the FFPC formats where you can only keep like 14 players or 16 players, Shakir will be dropped. But in the deep dynasty formats that we play in, where there's 35, you can get him as a throw-in piece right now, and it's easy to see him cracking the top 36, right? And he's playing with a quarterback that we considered. Josh Allen is either pick 1, 2, or 3 in these super flex leagues, and obviously I know where you would have him, but. And if there's no wide receiver 2, who's going to be there? Oh, yeah, they have Gabe Davis right now as their wide receiver 2. I think, not the book has been written on Davis, but we know what he is. He's a boomer bust wide receiver 3 that has top 10 upside in each week, but he's not guaranteed any targets. Whereas Shakir can be that 6 target, 5 catches for 75-yard type of player this year, right? Like this coming year. And then in 2024, as you identified, free agency, all that kind of stuff has to. Go ahead, Mark.
Look at Shakir's game log for this past year. In the games where he got run, there was 1 game against Pittsburgh early in the year where McKenzie missed and Shakir went something like 5 for 70 and a touchdown. And then he had some run later in the year too and had nice stats. He was just underutilized. That ain't going to happen this year. He could be their every week slot guy. He could be every down slot guy. He could be an outside guy. Let's see who they draft in the first round. But if they draft an offensive lineman in the first round, like I think they will, I really like Shakir this year.
Yeah, that's a really, and our own Mario Puig over at RotoWire had a very high scouting grade on him as well. So yeah, no, when 2 smart guys like yourself and Mario have advocated for Shakir, I'm going to be in on him as well. That's a good tip right there. One of the things that in Orphan rebuilding, I think has people confused is that when you have older wide receivers like a DeAndre Hopkins, a Mike Evans, that are still productive. I know Mike Evans wasn't productive for most of the year, but if you did stick with him and you made it through, he won you a championship. He had 200 yards on 10 receptions, so he still has the upside there. So I think dynasty players, when they take over Orphan, Stopa, is they think they have to sell these guys at a discount before they expire to 0. So my question for you is, 1, do you think that is true? I do not. I will make the counterpoint, but I'm just curious where you stand on the 30-year-old highly productive wide receivers.
Yeah, Mike Evans, he's certainly not somebody I'm going to be looking to buy in seasonal. We've seen drop-offs there, but for Dynasty, he's somebody for.
Pause for 1 second. Do you know what round he's going in seasonal right now? Take a guess.
I'm going to say. I'll take a guess. I'll say 9. He's going
in round 6, round 5, round 6. Okay. So then you're definitely out then. Okay. I thought you were going to say round 4, round 3, but that's fine. Round 9 for Mike Evans. You thought in a season.
The cliff comes fast for 30-year-old receivers. AJ Green is a great example. Julio Jones, a great example. Similar body types, those taller receivers, when they hit 30, I'm out.
Wait a second. Mike Evans had a game in week 17 that was 12 targets, 10 catches, 204 yards, and 3 touchdowns. That it's not just the size of the sample, because we know he wasn't great for most of the year, but sometimes it's the magnitude matters. That is a nuclear week-winning game.
For me, I'd rather be out a year too early than a year too late. So,
Oh,
I'd rather be out a week. So we can agree, we can disagree on this one. That's why we play the game, because there's
yeah.
disagreements,
Well,
right?
really, the point I was making though is not agree. And of course, you want to be out a year too early, year too late. But if if I just don't want people selling these players, trading them away. If you take over an orphan team and these players are on your team, often people are like, hey, I'll take a second round pick for them. I think that you need the here's the actionable takeaway. When you have DeAndre Hopkins on your team, when you have Cooper Kupp on your team, you don't want to trade these guys in the offseason. You want to trade these guys in week 2, in week 3, after they have the big game, because that's when you can get their max value. I think the dynasty calendar is a very interesting and an integral part of an orphan. People think they take over an orphan, they have to knock the thing down to its studs within a week and acquire all these picks or acquire, the Trey Lances, which are great strategies. But remember, if you're not trying to compete for a championship this year, you don't have to do the full rebuild in 6 weeks. You could wait until week 3 when Dalvin Cook has 90 yards and 2 touchdowns, and then you'll get your first round pick for him, right? You don't want to just sell him for 2.2 when there's more upside there, is really my point.
Yeah, and that's totally fair. You shouldn't be in a rush to sell for 80 cents on the dollar in the offseason. If you can get the full dollar, then I got no problem with that. But don't be in a rush to sell for 80 cents now. I think that's totally fair.
All right, so give me a running back now that you are going to be looking to trade as you're taking over an orphan team that you're looking to acquire in some of your builds here.
I mean, gosh, Derrick Henry scares me.
Oh, scares you. Okay.
Oh,
All right.
oh yeah. A lot of miles, a lot of carries. I tend to, this is NFL's a young man's game, more and more, like you talked about it earlier, pro style offenses, rookies and second year guys are more impactful than they've ever been. I think we disagree on some of these veteran guys, and your record speaks for itself for how you did last year. But for me going forward, I tend to be out on the older guys, and sometimes I miss those good seasons, but I tend to avoid the guys who wind up, like I've been out on Julio Jones for 3 or 4 years, but I did miss Travis Kelce last year. So, there's give and take of that.
Yeah. So the question I had asked you was who you're trying to acquire, but before you that though, you made a point I want to talk about here is that you have to remember Derrick Henry is one of these guys that qualify for what we talked about at the top of the podcast, where his redraft ADP is going to be, possible. It's going to be first round, right? When it's all said and done, it might even be a top 5 pick, depending on how you like to build your team. I don't think anybody doubts that he's going to be an elite fantasy running back in 2023. And because he's got that like kryptonite 29 next to his age, when you click on his dynasty card, he goes in like the 5th and 6th round. So if you want to do a young wide receiver build and you could still have Derrick Henry in the 4th, 5th round of your dynasty startup draft, these guys represent extreme values because yes, running back as a young man's game. I think that Derrick Henry, I think we agree, qualifies as an outlier. And though he's had tremendous workloads, he also, remember those first 2.5 seasons, he was DeMarco Murray's backup. So he had 2 seasons where he was a lightly used sports car. So Derrick Henry's someone that the market's going to agree with you, but I'm looking to acquire him before he has that 160-yard game
in a startup.
Right. But even now, like if there's a lot of teams that are like in 10th place, so they have pick 103 and they have Derrick Henry on their team, this is the time to go get Derrick Henry because there's no doubt in week 2 he's going to have that 117-yard 2-touchdown game, and then you're back to paying full retail for a 30-year-old running back. So if you're a running back away, that is someone I would target. But who's someone that you're targeting now that you're rebuilding an orphan?
I'd say if you wanted me to pick an older running back, I'd say
Doesn't have to be older.
I'd say Austin Eckler. If you compare Eckler and Henry, I prefer Eckler, even though they're similar in age, because so many fewer hits, so much of his value comes from receiving, tied to an elite quarterback. That they're gonna get some speed on that team. So I'd be all about Eckler. I would bet on Eckler's aging curve going forward far sooner than I would on Henry. Mark
Stopa, you did it again, man. You did it again. You You brought the goodness to the RotoWire Dynasty podcast. You're routinely requested as one of our favorite guests on this stream. So hopefully you will come back again. Follow him on Twitter at Mark Stopa. He gives a lot of great fantasy advice. He talks about just some pop culture, talks about politics. I think he's a great follow, one of my favorite follows on social media. His DMs are always open if you want to talk about football, if you want to talk about anything. He loves a good debate. What else are you promoting right now, Mark Stopa?
I talk investing. I sometimes I talk about, what's wrong with the world and how we can fix it, but just try to have try to make the world a better place for everybody and have some fun along the way with fantasy football or whatever other fun stuff people like to do.
Cool. And a couple other just notes on the show. We our Dynasty show on SiriusXM, the Dynasty Hour. Right now, you can just, if you have SiriusXM, just search just go on the search on the SXM app, the Dynasty Hour. We have 4 episodes up there. You can, just they're evergreen episodes that we talk dynasty strategy, superflex, some player specific stuff. You can follow me on social media at Alan Seslowsky. If you enjoy videos like this, consider hitting the like button, the subscribe to the RotoWire YouTube channel. We're going to be putting out new Dynasty videos every week. All right, everybody, get in some or take over some orphans. Get into some leagues. If you need any help with that, our DMs are always open at Alan Seslowsky, at Mark Stopa. And if you want to run any trades by us, we love talking trades. Until next week, everybody, enjoy your Dynasty leagues, and we'll talk about some startups in the near future weeks.